In this video, we're going to cover 3 different techniques that you can use to manage sports performance anxiety going into a competition. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, mental performance coach and the founder of SuccessStartsWithin.com. Sports performance anxiety refers to the state where you have extreme worries about what may or may not happen when you play. For the most part, this sports anxiety will be centered around the things that you don't want to have happen, such as you don't want to make mistakes, you don't want to get benched, you might worry about coach thinking less of you or your teammates being mad at you. But it can also be focused on positive outcomes you worried about, such as being really worried about playing well or really stressing about trying to force a good performance and increase your statistics. The reason sports performance anxiety holds you back is due to the physical symptoms that it causes, but also because of the avoidance mindset that it creates. The physical symptoms of anxiety will include that nervous feeling in your stomach, maybe some shaky hands, some trembling legs, and it can also be where your mind blanks out, right? So your mind is racing so much that you kind of blank out and you're not really conscious when you play. You're playing unconsciously, but not really in that flow state in that good way. It's more in a negative way. The other way that this sports performance anxiety impacts you is on a mental level where, you're thinking so much about what may or may not happen that you end up trying to avoid. So this is where we see some behavioral change happen, and maybe you hide out there on the field or court, you play safe, you play timidly, you play tense, simply because you are trying to avoid that negative outcome, or you're really trying to press and stress and force a good outcome. So we see that sports performance anxiety will negatively affect your performance, which is why we need some techniques to put in place to help you manage that anxiety. And technique number 1 is preparation. Preparation involves everything that goes into you being ready to compete. When you are prepared both physically and mentally, you are more confident when you play. Sports performance anxiety is really based in the idea of you trying to control the future, right? So there's this result that you either really want to get, or there's this result that you're trying to avoid, and so you try to control that future. The more you try to control that future, the more you are stressing about it, but also, the less attention you are giving to the present moment. But if we can make sure that you are fully prepared, so you're going into competition trusting that you've put in the mental preparation and the physical preparation that you need to put in order to succeed, it's much easier to trust in that preparation. When you trust in your preparation, you no longer try to force and control the result, which means you are allowing yourself to perform freely. A really great example of this comes from a target shooting client that I worked with. Now, he competed in target shooting. It was pistol shooting. And he focused very heavily on preparation. He probably prepared more than any other athlete that I have worked with. Through his preparation, what he did was he broke down every area of his game. But there were a few areas that really stood out to me that I think will be helpful to you when it comes to identifying areas that you can focus on with preparation. One key area for him was his mental preparation. So very early on when he and I were working together, we put in place a daily mental training routine for him. This daily mental training routine included exercises like mindfulness meditation, visualization, and self-talk. The reason that he used these exercises was because he knew that these exercises, if repeated on a daily basis, will not only help him prepare for his upcoming competition, but they are helping him strengthen mental skills so he'll be prepared for even competitions that are months away, simply because he's putting in this daily action. Another element of his preparation was his physical preparation, right? He trained a ton throughout the week, but he never trained throughout the week blindly. He always trained with clear intent. Whenever you're wanting to focus on physical preparation, don't just train to train to get better. And in order to get better, you need to know specifically what you need to improve. So this is where he got clear on the weak areas of his game. What did he need to spend the most time on? What was some low-hanging fruit that he could focus on and try to improve so that going into his next competition, he could get himself some easier points that he's been losing recently. So physical preparation was another element of his preparation throughout the week. And then the third area that he focused on with preparation was diet and fitness. So he knew that if he had good nutrition in place and he focused on his fitness throughout the week, that just gave him an extra level of confidence for the competition. By focusing so heavily on preparation, he had much more confidence when it came to the competition. that confidence was something he was able to fall back on. So instead of trying to force a good outcome, he trusted in his preparation. When he trusted in his preparation, this allowed him to simply be in the moment. And he and I talked a lot about reacting, trusting muscle memory, and it's only effective to trust muscle memory when you honestly trust your muscle memory. That means trusting your physical muscle memory, but also trusting, your mental muscle memory. Do you trust in your own thinking? Do you trust in your emotional state when you're playing? And he did, because it stemmed from his preparation. So how can you take this idea of preparation and apply it to yourself? Well, what I would suggest you do is you start focusing on routines. You want to focus on a daily mental training routine, and it doesn't need to be too long, right? It could simply be incorporating a mindfulness meditation practice on a daily basis. It could also be beginning to use some visualization or self-talk, just like the target shooting athlete that I worked with did. But you want to start using a mental training routine to ensure that you are mentally prepared for your competition. And then any other routine that you can think of, you want to incorporate. But I love routines so much because if you focus on implementing routines, it's much easier that you'll be prepared. You don't necessarily need to think every single week, am I preparing enough? It's, hey, if I'm focusing on my pre-selected routines, I know that I'm preparing enough, which means I can fall back on the memory of sticking to those routines when it comes to my next competition, and that's just going to help me be that much more confident to compete. And when I am more confident, I'm less anxious because I can trust in my preparation. So for yourself, make sure that you go through and you think, what are all the routines I need to incorporate throughout the week to make sure that I'm both physically and mentally prepared for my competition? The next technique you can use is self-talk. Now, self-talk can be broken into a couple different categories, right? A couple different ways that we can use this self-talk to help you when it comes to anxiety. But the first way that I want us to really focus on is actually reframing. So you want to start reframing the current self-talk that you have. What reframing means is you notice yourself having a negative thought, let's say, or even an anxious thought, right? So if you notice yourself having an anxious thought, like, I hope this happens, or I hope this doesn't happen, you would notice that you have that thought, and then you would respond to that. So you'd reframe that thought. So let's say I hope I don't play poorly today. I would reframe that to, I trust in my training and I trust in my preparation. Reframing is such a powerful tool when it comes to anxiety because anxiety is directly linked to your thinking. When you think about what may or may not happen, you are thinking about the future and you are thinking about the outcome. It is that outcome and that future thinking that fuels anxiety. If we can get you to stop thinking so much about what may or may not happen and think in a way that will build confidence and to help bring your attention back into the present moment, you will see this anxiety reduced. A great example of this comes from a tennis player that I worked with. When she and I first began working together, she was so nervous and so anxious that she didn't even want to keep playing anymore. Right? She had gotten herself to the point where tennis was no longer fun. She was so anxious when she showed up, and she honestly just didn't want to do it anymore. But through working on this idea of reframing, we got her to the point where she was enjoying playing and playing at a high level again because her nerves were no longer present. So what she ended up doing was she focused on reframing her thoughts on an ongoing basis, right? So what she would do is as the week would progress, she would have training sessions every single day. At the end of her days, she would go back and she would write down a few different anxious thoughts that she had that day. Then what she would do is she would rewrite a positive alternative, right? So this reframing that I'm talking to you about, she would write that down. As she would go through and she would do that every day, she was practicing this idea of reframing, which meant that when she needed to reframe in the moment when she was actually playing, it was so much easier for her to do it because she had been practicing by writing it down. So then as her tournaments would start and she was getting ready to compete, she really paid attention to her thinking. Whenever she noticed herself having these outcome thoughts, these worries, these fearful thoughts, she quickly reframed them to more positive and productive thoughts. By going through this reframing exercise, she saw a significant reduction in her anxiety. And when I ask her, so we have check-in calls every once in a while, and when I ask her what she continues to do and what she continues to use to help with her anxiety before competitions, reframing is always the first tool that she mentions. So how can you use this idea of reframing for yourself to help manage your anxiety? Well, I would honestly encourage you to do exactly what the young tennis player did. She paid attention throughout the week to her negative thoughts. And she used an in-the-moment reframing practice along with a daily tracking practice to help build the habit of reframing. So what the daily tracking part is it's where you go through, just like she did, and you write down negative thoughts or anxious thoughts that you have, and then you reframe them. You can use that. You can do this in a notebook. You can use just a piece of paper every day. You can do it in the notes section on your phone. But the idea is you're physically writing down and keeping track of those anxious thoughts, and then you actually reframe them. This helps so much because it is practicing this idea of reframing. And our thinking is built on repetition. So when you go through and you are repeating this exercise day in and day out, you're really ingraining this idea in your mind of, when I have these anxious thoughts, I want to change them to these more positive and productive thoughts. Then the in the moment part is where you notice and you pay attention when you're actually practicing, and especially before competitions, to the anxious thoughts you have. And as soon as you notice an anxious thought, you reframe it to a more positive or productive thought. So you actually go through this reframing exercise in the moment. When you focus on your self-talk, so you focus more on the way you are talking to yourself, the thoughts you have going into a game, this is where you find yourself reclaiming control over your anxiety. Because once again, anxiety is directly linked to your thinking. What are you focused on and what are you thinking about going into a game? If you are thinking about what you don't want to have happen, or you're worried about all the different consequences of making mistakes or really trying and wanting to play well, you will only see your anxiety increase. However, if you can notice those thoughts and then reframe them to calming thoughts, more confident thoughts, thoughts that remind you of the preparation that you've put in, that's where you will see confidence increase and anxiety be reduced. And then the third technique that you can use is breathing. Whenever we're talking about anxiety, we cannot overlook the physical symptoms of the anxiety. When you experience extreme nerves, nobody else needs to tell you what you feel, right? You know what it feels like. It's that churning feeling in your stomach, shaky hands, shaky legs. Maybe if you talk to somebody, your voice starts to shake, but you know when you feel anxious. The physical symptoms are so strong. It's like they slap you in the face. They say, hey, I am here. What we want to do is we want to work on reducing those physical symptoms. And the best way to reduce physical symptoms whenever you're anxious is by focusing on your breathing. Now, this is also going to do an additional thing. And the additional thing is it will center your attention in the present moment. In the previous technique, I was talking about how your self-talk drives anxiety if your thoughts are focused in the future. Now, if your thoughts are focused in the future, we could say that your attention is in the future. What we want to do is bring that attention back into the present moment. In order to be focused in the present moment, you need to work on centering your attention on something taking place in the present moment, and your breathing is a fantastic way to do so. So an example of using breathing to manage anxiety actually comes from an athlete that I just started working with. Now, he's a high school cross-country runner. And 2 weeks ago, we had our first call. And after that first call, he had his first race, right? His first competition. Up to that point, he had been really struggling with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and underperforming during his races. What was happening was when he found himself running the pace that he wanted to run, he started to become afraid of not being able to keep up that pace. So then he started slowing down. What he did 2 weeks ago is that he began using a 5-minute breathing exercise before he raced. So he sat down, he closed his eyes, and he did a breathing exercise for 5 minutes. He ended up having one of his best races of the year. And then fast forward to this previous weekend, he had his next race. During that race, he ended up having a personal best. What he's doing is he's using this breathing before he runs to calm his mind, to reduce his anxiety, and to bring his attention in to the present moment. So how can you use this idea of using breathing to manage your anxiety? Well, just like the cross-country runner, you want to make sure that you start using a breathing exercise before you compete. No matter what sport you play, I encourage you to use at least a 5-minute breathing exercise before you compete. You can do this on the bus, in the car, at home, in the locker room, at the field when you're stretching. It doesn't necessarily matter when you use it. I will say that the closer to competition you use it, the better. But you want to go through this 5-minute breathing exercise. What that does is it starts to ground yourself in the present moment, and it starts to instill a calmer state in your mind. That calmer state will carry with you as you go into the competition. Now, once you've done your 5-minute breathing exercise before you compete, you want to continue to focus on your breathing while you compete. Now, this will vary based on your sport. So the runner, for example, he can't focus on taking nice deep breaths while he's running because that's going to be too tough. So he just has to focus on getting into a rhythm with his breathing, whatever that rhythm ends up being for him, but still he can focus on his breathing while he is running. If you are a basketball player, during a timeout, you can focus on your breathing. Before you shoot a free throw, you can focus on your breathing. Or you can just focus on a breathing rhythm while you're running up and down the court, just like a runner would. If you play a sport where there's more time to wait, such as baseball or softball or golf, you want to use more of a slower, more controlled breathing exercise before shots or before at-bats or before pitches. The idea here is pre-competition, you want to use a 5-minute breathing exercise to calm yourself down and to relax your mind. During competition, you want to focus on your breath whenever you can to also calm yourself down, but most importantly, to keep your attention in the present moment. Because once again, anxiety is driven by those outcome thoughts. The more present you can be, the less anxious you will feel. So in summary, we know that sports performance anxiety will negatively affect you as an athlete because of the physical symptoms it causes, but also because of this avoidance mindset where you end up playing it safe and trying to hide when you perform, right? You're performing tense. To manage your anxiety going into competition, there are 3 techniques that you can use. Technique number 1 is preparation. Make sure you are as prepared as possible. Technique number 2 is self-talk. And technique number 3 is breathing. Use those 3 techniques to manage your anxiety going into your next competition. If you're interested in learning more about one-on-one mental performance coaching or any of the sports psychology programs that I have available, I've put links to those in the description below, or you can head over to successstartswithin.com to learn more. Thank you for watching the video, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do.